Hello, I am Padma Mallikarjunan, an Enterprise Support Manager at AWS, and I am based out of Austin, Texas. Welcome to AWS Knowledge Center Live. Joining me here today is Rob Higuereta. Rob, why don't you give us a quick introduction?
Hi, my name is Rob Higuereta, and I'm a Senior Technical Account Manager, also located in Austin, Texas here today.
Thank you, Rob. Today we're going to be talking about various ways in which you can save costs while using AWS and the tools that you can use to help you save costs. Among the tools, we will be talking about the AWS Trusted Advisor, the online tool which provides you real-time guidance as you provision your resources using AWS best practices. We will also talk about additional tools. We will cover the AWS Cost Explorer, and we'll talk about tools where you can leverage for cost optimization. Before we dive deep into our topic today, a quick note to the attendees who are online. Please feel free to use the chat window on the right-hand side to share your thoughts with us and ask your questions throughout the episode. We look forward to hearing from you. With us, can you walk us through what we're going to be talking about today, Rob?
Absolutely. So I'm going to show my screen here, and we'll kind of go over some different areas that we're going to cover today on today's episode. So we're going to start by talking about AWS Trusted Advisor that you mentioned before and go over the cost optimization pillar. So if you watched the last episode that we had, we went over the security pillar, and today we're going to go over cost optimization and kind of show you how you can use that to get some cost savings. We're going to go over understanding EC2 costs and Cost Explorer, just so you can see your up-to-date information on EC2 instances and running hours for those, just so you can kind of understand your spend there. We're going to go over creating budgets as well, and budgets are really helpful and kind of powerful to give you that information that you want without having to be in the console. We're additionally going to look at EC2 right-sizing recommendations that's built into Cost Explorer. We'll go a little bit deeper into AWS cost optimization with the Compute Optimizer itself as a service. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper also into going into EC2 spot instances for savings, specifically with auto-scaling groups in EC2, and going over some other ways you can cost cut with Compute, looking at AWS Workspaces and Amazon Workspaces information. So that's where we're going to kind of start. So I guess before we get started here, I'm going to jump over, and I mentioned we're going to talk about the cost optimization pillar and Trusted Advisor. So we've got 14 checks now that are built into Trusted Advisor, giving you ability to understand your cost and savings. So we see here we've got Amazon EC2 Reserved Instance Optimization, Amazon Relational Database Services Reserved Instance Optimization, low utilization of Amazon EC2 instances, idle load balancers, savings plans, quite a few different items, right, that we're going to cover today, just in highlighting them to really show these are a lot of tools that you can use, or a lot of information you can get from Trusted Advisor on how to save costs in your account. So you can see I've got a few of these here that are highlighted in green, and those are our 5 new checks that we just came out with recently for Trusted Advisor. So if you've been using the cost optimization before, maybe you haven't looked at it in a couple of weeks, go back into the portal, take a look at Trusted Advisor, and see these new checks, specifically ones around savings plan that'll check your usage for EC2, Fargate, and Lambda, and give you savings plans purchase recommendations there. We've also added Amazon Elasticache Reserve Node Optimization, so that's going to give you your checks against your Elasticache usage. Amazon Redshift Reservation Node Optimization, so that you can get the information that you need about your existing Redshift clusters and usage. Then we're also going to have a recommendation added for Amazon Elasticsearch Reserved Instance Optimization. And finally, just on the Amazon Relational Database Reserved Instance Optimization suggestions there. So quite a number of checks. I went over those really quickly. So Padma, I just want to take a second to see in the chat, was there anything that, kind of came up for questions on any of these specific ones?
Hey, thank you, Rob. Hey, everyone. Thank you for your engagement. It's good to see you folks here. So just to quickly touching on some of the topics that I'm seeing here on the slide here, Rob, I see Amazon EC2, Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud. It provides a wide selection of instance types and sizes, really giving that flexibility to right size the compute resources to meet all the business needs. So I have a quick question over there. I see reserved instances and I see savings plan. Can you dive deep a little bit more on those, such as when do I use one versus the other, or how do they work in combination?
Yeah, so it's a really good question because there's obviously some difference between the two of them and why we offer both products. So I'll start with our reserved instances that have been around a little bit longer than savings plans. And reserved instances are a cost saving construct that AWS has for our customers to help you reduce the costs for steady state workloads that you have in EC2, RDS, Elasticache, Elasticsearch, and such. So that way, reserved instances are designed if you have a steady workload that you're going to have kind of up and running on those platforms at a certain level. You can basically purchase a reserved instance for those specific instance types and families to help you reduce your overall cost from paying for on-demand. We're going to go a little bit more into the different cost-saving constructs as we get going here today so that you can understand what those are. But definitely a good question on what reserved instances are. And then savings plans are next, and they're newer, and they offer two different kind of versions to them. A compute, which is general, covers your EC2, Fargate, and Lambda usage, and lets you be a lot more flexible. Basically, you make a commitment to a certain amount of dollars spend for your compute hours, and that's suggested to you in the console as well based on what your usage is currently of EC2, and we'll give you a price to help you reduce your cost on your Amazon compute usage. Then the other one is basically a savings plans for EC2 compute, and it works a little bit more similarly to our traditional reserved instances, where you choose specific classes of family that you want to use. And based on you kind of limiting those classes to specific ones, you also get kind of a little bit deeper discount on, kind of solidifying on a certain type of, say, T3s and C4s or C5s and such that your application normally uses. So it's a really good topic to kind of take a look at too as well. So if you haven't looked at savings plans or reserved instances in the past and you're not using them, that is a really good, just a start of all of this to look at.
Thank you so much for that, Rob. And I'm going to be pasting the links here on the chat window as you go through these so that our attendees can follow along.
Great. All right. So I'm going to go back to my screen here, and I'm going to actually pull up the console so we can take a look at Trusted Advisor itself, right, and see what it looks like for the cost optimization pillar. So if you weren't with us last episode, we went through the different pillars here between security and service limits. And today we're going to talk about cost optimization. So I've already kind of narrowed down to the cost optimization pillar in Trusted Advisor. From here, we can see that we have potential to save $2,319.31. I do want to preface this with the fact this is a best case scenario, right? You are able to install every single check that we recommend. This is where you could potentially save that. And that's why it says potential, right? You're going to have to read through these recommendations and kind of gauge through your usage and how your application works or how your infrastructure is set out on whether some of these recommendations are right for you. But let's take a look, because even if we could save half of $2,300 a month, that's still a considerable amount of savings, right? So these checks here, kind of like we discussed on the last episode, they refresh every 24 hours. You can come here every 5 minutes and refresh them all right now if you wanted to, and it would reload our page with most recent ones. I just updated these a little bit ago, so they're pretty accurate to what's going on in the account. So you can see it's refreshed 41 minutes ago. So as we look through here, just to cover a couple of them, and since we're going to be focusing primarily on EC2 savings today, we can see that we've got Amazon RDS IdleDB instance checks. This check here, as it kind of goes through and shows, just like it did in the security pillar, it shows us specifically what that check is doing. Checks for configuration of your RDS instances that appear to be idle, right? So somebody spun up a test database that they were doing some development work in and abandoned the database. Well, you probably don't want that sitting out there. It may only be $12.24 per month of savings, but over a year that adds up. You leave it there for a longer amount of time, right? So this is going to help you keep track of that information and look at those idle databases. As we can see here from this check, it's checking that the last 14 days, there's been no connection. So that's where it's saying, hey, this probably isn't use. It's 14 days without anyone touching this thing or making connections to it. But let's look at the low utilization for Amazon EC2 instances, because we're going to be focusing a lot on EC2 today and how you can save money and cost across that, right? So this low utilization Amazon EC2 instance checks lets you check your Amazon Elastic Cloud Compute instances that were running at any time during the last 14 days, right? To see if the CPU utilization was 10% or less, and also looks at network IO for 5 megabits or less. So keep in mind, this is looking at just CPU and disk, but not memory metrics. So if you had a memory-intensive Java application or an in-memory database of some kind that was running on an instance, you would want to take that into account as you look through this report and know that, hey, I'm going to have to do a little bit of additional, deep dive into that instance to see if I really can, judge this as low utilization. We can see we've got our typical alert criteria here as well that shows yellow when instance had 10% or less daily average CPU, right? Like I mentioned before, for the past 14 days. We can see here I've got quite a few instances in this account that are smaller, still T2 micros, T2 smalls and such. But over time, those $9, $10, $30 a month, that all adds up. And it shows here kind of this CPU utilization 0%. This one's got 6.3%, so it's being used, just not as heavily, and doesn't kind of fit above the threshold of usage for the low utilization instance. So this is a good example of one that you may want to look at and see what else is being done on this server, on this instance, to kind of understand what the usage is. But we'll kind of go into a little bit more too on how we can maybe make adjustments based on that.
Hey, Rob, real quick question over there.
Of course.
If you could zoom in a little bit, and thank you for the question, Hussein Abbasi and Nick Reinke. Just zoom in a little bit so that we can see what some of those percentages are. Thank you so much. That's so much better.
Great, yeah, hopefully that's a little bit easier to read.
Yeah, and while looking at low utilization Amazon EC2 instances, one of the questions that pops up sometimes is, how can I keep getting alerted on this? Can you give us a quick minute on what are some of the options available to get alerts on the Trusted Advisor checks?
Yeah, that's a perfect question. So we kind of covered it last episode, but obviously if you weren't with us, welcome, and let's make sure we know how to do this in this one as well. So we do have our preferences, and here we can go in and we can set billing contacts and email preferences for weekly email notifications. So that's going to allow us to get a weekly summary, essentially, of what's going on in our account. And you can have it set to your billing contacts, to your security contacts, or the IT operations contacts that you have to set up. And that's going to deliver you then a weekly email report of your Trusted Advisor checks. And maybe, like I said, if you're sending for cost optimization, your finance team probably only really cares about the cost optimization side. But that's a way for them to get a weekly report of just the overall areas where maybe they can bring up for discussion with the the SRE team or DevOps team, whatever, to help them review these things as well with from the finance perspective. So it's a really good question, because it's actually a really good way just to kind of get these checks without coming into the portal yourself and having to review these manually. You just get that kind of email to you on what's changed. So thanks. Are there any other questions or anything like that?
Not so far, but another question that we also keep hearing from our customers is the EC2 low utilization. Sometimes I have an instance that is, yes, it is currently underutilized, but I have it in there for a business purpose, such as a peak traffic. What does cost savings look like in that scenario?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. We're going to go a little bit further into that too, specifically talking about that Elastic Cloud Compute with the spot instance usage and auto-scaling groups. So that's going to allow us to really get that ability to kind of plan for peak, but save for our low time by leveraging an auto-scaling group to help us expand our compute capacity as it increases load. So it's definitely a great topic that we're going to cover and go over. So I'm glad you brought it up. If we don't have any other questions right now about Trusted Advisor information, such, we can kind of move on to some other areas where we can kind of get into. So to just making sure, Padma, do we have anything else on Trusted Advisor?
That's what we have, but keep
Okay,
posting those
perfect.
questions there, everyone, and Rob is here to answer those questions for you. And I'll keep posting those links as he talks through these items, and you can follow along too. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks. Yeah, definitely keep the questions coming. Definitely take a look at Trusted Advisor and the cost optimization pillar. I do want to call out, in case we didn't mention it from last episode too, these cost optimization checks are available for our business and enterprise support customers. So if you have basic or developer, you're not going to see the cost optimization pillar available to you in Trusted Advisor, but we're giving you this information here today, right? So you can look at these different checks that we showed on the slide, as well as here in the console. This list of checks are a great thing for you to incorporate into your just kind of normal operations checks, right? So you can go through and you can kind of check yourself for Amazon RDS idle DB instances and see, your instances that haven't been used. Checking for idle load balancers is really important. They're lower cost items, but again, if you have a whole bunch of them sitting out there, you want to save money through those. So if you are on basic or developer support, still take these checks and principles, and you can find these online with the Trusted Advisor website that Padma has a link to, and you can use those kind of checks to kind of build your own way to take a look at these and kind of analyze your overall usage. So I just wanted to call that out to make sure. But what everyone does have access to is kind of nice, and that's what we're going to cover next. So we're going to look into a little bit of billing information. So based on, we've got some different EC2 instances out here that we can see, quite a few different ones, but I don't really understand what this is costing me, right? So I want to understand, just as a regular user or just from your finance team, they want to understand what spend looks like. I have customers that ask, hey, I know we've got lots of instances. I know they've got running hours. I know they cost me money, but I don't really know how to kind of dig into that and see. So we're going to jump over into Cost Explorer. So our Cost Explorer, if you're not familiar with it, is the AWS kind of console that allows you to look into your spend and information on your accounts. So whether you have a single account or whether you have a organization that has a master payer account, you can use Cost Explorer to come in and see. Even if you're like, I use it on my personal account. It's a couple accounts that I have set up. It's small, but I still like to know how much I'm spending on things, so I go in and look at Cost Explorer to understand what my spend looks like. To start with, we start with this kind of at the Cost Explorer home. This is going to be a good overview to understand kind of what your spend looks like just at a high level. It gives you your current month's cost, your forecasted month's cost, what your percentage is increased for this month. So I deployed a whole lot of instances recently, partially for this episode, partially for some testing and usage with my customers. So my bill has gone up considerably. If I was in an organization, right, and my finance team all of a sudden saw my bills spill up 159%, they probably want to understand why. So that's why we're kind of covering this information today, so you can understand and help to see that. Another nice area here is trends. So we have these different trends that are available that help you keep track of specific service usage as well for that month and let you visualize that, hey, my guard duty costs have gone up $93.69 because we turned it on, which is significantly more than what we spent last month on it, right? It's just a great way to kind of see a high-level overview of your individual costs and such like that. So as I was mentioning, we kind of want to drill in and understand the EC2 cost, right? So we can see a little bit of information here that we see T2 micro costs are up $32.91, T2 medium costs, but we want to see what this means overall for our spend. So we're going to drill into Cost Explorer, and we've got our filter here set to the last 6 months. We're grouping by service, and we can see the different spend items that we have here. We've got the Elastic Container Service for Kubernetes, otherwise known as EKS, Route 53. We've got some transfer SFTP usage, EC2 Other, which we'll cover a little bit as well because it's a good area to investigate in EC2 spend that's a little ambiguous to customers. And as you can see, for us, it's a fairly high level spend item. So you do want to be able to analyze and understand that. And then we've got down here our EC2 instances that are in use as well. And so we kind of want to see a little bit of information. So we're going to isolate down to just our EC2 service. And to do that, we come over here to the service filter and then just kind of come down and say EC2 instances, right? And apply my filter. Now we get just isolated to spend of just our EC2 instances. So we can say, all right, for the month of April, I have $123.63 in EC2 instance costs. Great. But I want to know a little bit more breakdown, right? What we saw in the highlights where it showed us that T2 micro was increased and some other instance types. By coming up to the group by, we choose usage type, and we can see specifically a little bit more detailed information on what usage it is, what region it is, and understand a little bit more about what our spend is, right? So this is really helpful on the fly for you to be able to come in and see your EC2 instance spend by instance type within Cost Explorer. So I'll pause there, Padma, just to see if there's anything that were questions that came up around the couple of filters that I've gone through so far. I'm moving a little quick through these, so I just want to make sure that, if anyone has any questions, we address those.
Yep, there are some questions. Let's go over them. First, briefly, you did mention a little bit about organizations,
Yes.
AWS organizations. So just to quickly recap for our attendees online here, organizations helps you centrally govern your environment as you grow and scale your workloads on AWS. Whether you're a growing startup or a large enterprise, it helps you manage billing, control access, including some of the cost optimization tools that Rob was talking about here. And I'll paste a link to AWS organization so you have a little bit more information and can do some more reading on that. I see additional questions here. This is a good question. Thank you for your question, Flash Harry 82. What are the differences between Cost Optimizer and Compute Optimizer?
So we have Compute Optimizer that's just going to cover your EC2 like compute optimization, right? So specific classes and such. And we're going to go over that a little bit more in detail. We've got kind of a little breakdown on how Compute Optimizer really works in order to give you those recommendations. But I'm not 100% sure what you meant by just Cost Optimizer. But if you're just talking about general, like within Cost Explorer and cost optimization, that's a much wider topic that is definitely a great one to go over as far as a combination of all those things with the Trusted Advisor cost optimization, where you're looking at all the different things besides just EC2 compute, like your Elastic Load Balancing usage, Amazon Redshift usage, Elasticsearch usage and such within AWS. And so that's kind of the broader cost optimization side of things. And we're kind of really just narrowly focusing right now on the EC2 kind of cost side. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit. Feel free to add into the chat some more if I missed something, but happy to try and get you the answer you need.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rob. Yeah, I believe Flash Harry 82 meant Cost Explorer because you were talking about that when this question popped up. So hopefully we answered your questions there. If not, send us follow-up information there. And also, Johan, Cloud Guru, sorry about the audio issues you're facing. Hopefully, you can follow along some of the links that I'm pasting here, so you can do some additional reading offline. So if you want to follow along in the chat window, hopefully your audio issues work out soon. Over to you, Rob.
Okay, perfect. So we were looking here right at our Cost Explorer, just to kind of understand the basics of things. And I said I wanted to go into specifically also our EC2 Other category. So I'm going to take off this just service filter for just EC2 instances and go back to general usage type. But I'm going to cover EC2 Other because it is part of your EC2 spend as a category. And it's one of those ones that sometimes customers come to us and say, I don't understand what EC2 Other is because it's just called Other, right? So we can come down here and we can filter onto EC2 Other, right? Since it's a cost category that we have, it's a service that's kind of built into Cost Explorer. And so we can filter down to that and see. Now, again, if we didn't have any other filters and stuff applied to it, I'm just going to click apply and wait for that to filter here. There we go. Now, I have this already filtered to usage type right from before. If I took that off, which a lot of customers, if you just come into the console and you were to come into services and choose EC2 Other, it looks like this. Again, not super detailed or informational, right? Because it's just a blob of, again, EC2 Other costs. But again, we can go in and we can take that usage type filter and apply it and get more in-depth information as to what that EC2 Other cost is. So if you've never had it explained to you before, it's basically all the cost for using EC2 instances that falls outside of the actual compute hours of, or EC2 running hours of those instances itself. So you have your charge for that T3 micro that gives you the CPU and memory, basically the instance itself. And then you have other services that you leverage with your EC2 instances like Elastic Block Storage, NAT gateways, and provisioned IOP drives in Elastic Block Storage. So this kind of helps you break down and see that spend as well in that EC2 Other category. So you can see here we've got NAT gateway hours that we're being charged for. If you're not familiar with NAT gateways, they're ways that you have a private subnet within your virtual private cloud that can then allow it to communicate out to the internet. It's really commonly used. It's also a great way to kind of use with our transit gateways for centralized outbound networking. A lot of things you can go into on that, but here you can see kind of the cost hours that it's going to cost for you to have those NAT gateways. We can see NAT gateway hours in different regions, right? Volume usage. So we've got some different storage volumes that are out here that are costing us a little bit of money. We've seen Elastic IP addresses. So one of the trusted advisor checks is for Elastic IP addresses. If you have them attached to an EC2 instance or they're in usage with the NAT gateway or such, they're not going to cost you anything. But if they're detached, they're going to cost you some money. And here's a way to see, kind of what those costs are for the Elastic IP addresses. And then we still have, again, a little bit more ambiguous other category. Now, if you need to be able to see what those are, we can scroll down here in Cost Explorer, and you can see a table of all this information. Lots of zeros here, so a lot of usage. But as we scroll across, maybe we adopted some usage here, and that's why we'll see those. But those are what's going to get clumped into that other category. And if you wanted to, you could even download this into a CSV. So if you're like me and you've worked with other finance people, or even as yourself, you're trying to put together your budget numbers and understand what your spend looks like, this CSV can be really helpful because you can download it, take it into Excel or into Google Sheets or something, and be able to manipulate that data and put it into graphs of your own and tables and such like that. So that way you can kind of work with it outside of Cost Explorer. You can do this for pretty much any of the views that you've got here in Cost Explorer. So it's not limited to just this specific service type and filtered or anything like that. If we take this off and just look at overall service, we can see that we just changed the amount of data that we have available. So it's just going to refresh my spend data here. You see it's linked by service, and we can see that we've got, the ability to download that CSV here as well still. So just wanted to call that out so that you can use that CSV option as well, because it's really powerful to be able to use for your own analysis outside of Cost Explorer. Pat, just check in again, see if there's any questions or anything like that before we move on to kind of the next area that we were going to look at.
Quick question for you here, Rob. Can you talk a little bit about the recommendations that the AWS tools would provide? Let's say I'm within an instance family. When should I downsize, or when should I move up a size? Can you sort of talk a little bit about the tools that are available that'll tell us, give us a lens into our costs and how we can switch to right size our environment?
Yeah, yes, that's perfect. So right here inside of Cost Explorer, we've got a really powerful tool that's available us to use that we're going to cover here as well. So let's look at it right now, and we'll just take a peek and see. So as you saw here, we've got the recommendations that's located within Cost Explorer. If we click on that, we're taken into the recommendations page. And this gives us an overview of areas where we can save potentially by choosing recommendations of either different instance classes and sizes, or underutilized instances are analyzed for this information. So here we see, right, resource optimization recommendations. We've got 28 EC2 right sizing opportunities found. Great. Taking action could save you an estimated $603 monthly, and that's a good amount of money. So let's take a look and see under View All, what that looks like and how to read kind of this report and overall. So we see we've got the same thing, 28 optimizations. We've got an estimated 50% savings. I mean, who doesn't want to save 50% on their bill, right? We've got the option again here if we want to download this and work with it outside. So you have to present this data to someone who doesn't have access to the console and you want them to be able to see the recommendations. You could download this to a CSV. Otherwise, we're just going to look here. And it's going to give us a recommendation to say, modify instance, right? Because it's gone through, it's done some right sizing analysis on us to see that the CPU is underutilized, the disk is not heavily used with networking and such. So let's get that fixed and modify the instance and save you $63.61 per month potentially. So even with this instance using 17% CPU, we can see that it's still considered oversized for what its usage is. So we have all these view buttons per instance basically to come in and look at. So let's just pick this top one because it's $63 a month, right, to save, and see what it recommends we do. So it tells us our account information and such, and the instance ID that we can see what size it is, T32 extra large currently. And then we scroll down here and it says, again, this is what our utilization is. We've had it running for 122 hours based on this analysis. And we recommend that you modify your utilization, your underutilized T32 extra large instance to a T3 extra large, right? Basically cutting it in half. So based on this recommendation, it also then gives us information as to what the CPU would potentially look like on that. This one's nice and easy. We halved it. It's using 17% right now. Our estimation on its compute for the processor available in a T3 extra large is that you're going to see double the CPU. So if your application, will work fine with say 40, 50, 60% CPU utilization with no impact to it, this is a good recommendation for you to take advantage of because you're only going up to 34% CPU and you have an estimated savings there of $63.61 a month. So if you're like me and this is my personal account, or you're a smaller company and every penny counts, right, as you're kind of a startup and want to make sure that you're getting everything, $63.61 a month is a decent amount of money to save, especially over the course of the year. We do get a couple other recommendations too as well. Like I said, say your application works fine with 70% CPU. You don't need the additional memory and stuff like that at the size of instance. Maybe you can go to a T3 medium or a T3 large instead. Your CPU utilization goes up, but your savings goes up as well. Again, I want to call out these metrics are going off CPU and your network and not your memory utilization. So you're going to have to do that due diligence yourself to analyze a little bit further, but it at least gives you a starting point to start researching your usage and understand that, hey, I may have some instances that are out here that I can decrease in size and get some cost savings for. Based on what's available here, you could then go to the Amazon EC2 console and start resizing that instance. If you're not familiar with how to resize an instance, all you have to do is stop your instance, choose the right size that it recommends for here, and start the instance. There are a couple other caveats that you'll want to take into mind. So you'll want to review the EC2 documentation on resizing instances just to make sure that you're not going to lose, say, an IP address that you were using on the public side. And that goes back to our Elastic IPs that can help you with that. But just want to call it out so you don't just go out and stop an instance and have an issue with things as you're trying to resize these things.
Yeah, that's a really, really good way you put it, Rob. Yeah, these are recommendations, and you will take into account your business use case, your application requirements, and your peak requirements, and determine which of these would be the right fit for your business. Thank you for the really good overview there, Rob. There is another question here, also from Flash Harry 82. Thank you for all the great questions here. So the question is there a way in that billing report to get a list of IDs for resources that are producing the cost? So let's say you see a bucket that has a really large cost. How can you go back and translate those to the actual resource IDs? So one of the things that I can think of for those is using AWS cost allocation tags. You can associate tags to each of your AWS resources. It's a key value pair. And then as you generate these billing reports, the tags will flow into your bill. And these tags could be maybe your cost center. They could be your environment. You could say production or location. And you can analyze and sort of slice and dice your cost and billing data based on those tags. Rob, your take on that?
No, I think that's a really good way to do that, to be able to help you kind of get that analysis and information right, is leveraging tags. They're kind of really important to a lot of things, not only just billing, but you can use tagging to help you with authorization for identity and access management as well. But billing tags and stuff, as you can see here, it has a filter already built in with that in mind, where if we had tagging enabled, I don't have any tags on these accounts, on the instances and such, but I would be able to then filter and be able to ID those by that way and get that information. If you're looking for just straight up like on the EC2 side and looking at what instance ID to get you the resources, right, we do have the instance IDs located here that you can see and understand, what you're looking at by then downloading that CSV, and you'll have output of all of your EC2 instances that are recommended here for usage. We could go even deeper into that, and we have another setup here. Let me switch over, and I'll get to the budgets. And I'm going to actually jump to a different account that has a little bit more budget information to it. So let's look here. And I'm going to pull up budgets because we can actually get a little bit more information, do a lot more things into overall spend. So if you do have like an organization set up, your master payer account gets everything filtered up to it, and you can see kind of some additional information and go into more detail on stuff. But there's this thing called cost and usage reports. So what I was mentioning about being able to drill in and see like individual instance IDs and stuff like that, if you wanted to filter by those and review that data, cost and usage reports are really powerful. You can combine those with like Athena to do queries against your cost and usage to build really powerful reporting that will give you down to those instance IDs, even down to say like IOPS per cluster on an Amazon Aurora instance, so that you can understand what your cost is for those individual IOPS. So if you're not using cost and usage reports right now, you can take a look at this. We do have some documentation online that I don't think we have a link for right now, but we can probably pull it up and get it into the chat that will cover kind of how to set up a cost and usage report. So I have one set up right now that's just called usage, right? But it gives me hourly granularity into this usage based on the refresh rate. And it basically just goes through an S3 bucket, and then we can build off of that S3 bucket using Athena to then query that data and get really granular resource information back. So even more powerful than what Cost Explorer has built into it. We have cost and usage reports available too. So hopefully that answers that.
Yep. Thank you, Rob. And I posted the link to the AWS cost and usage reports as well. Thanks you for talking about that. There is another question from Kevin Carson 89. Not sure how much I'll be able to answer that, but more or less you're asking for an AWS solution to sort of do the streaming for live streaming, and if we have solutions for that. I'm going to send you a link that I see here for live streaming on AWS, and it talks about a solution where you can use live streaming on AWS with Media Store. And uses the AWS Elemental Media Live solution.
Mm-hmm.
Got to paste that link here, and maybe a good rating that you can read offline. And if you have further follow-up questions on that, always use the forums, awsamazon.com. We love to hear questions through the forums too. So if we cannot answer this question on here on our live stream, we'll always get back to you via the forums. But I'll paste the link to the live streaming solution here.
Yeah, there is on that. Actually, I've looked at some of those. There is out on the AWS solutions. There's actually a really good one for setting up how to do your own live streaming. So definitely would check out those AWS solutions that Padma's linking to and see that data. Great. Any other questions that we have right now?
Not so far.
Okay, perfect. So I guess I'll take this second here since we're inside of this kind of budget view to dig in a little bit more and show budgets, right? So we've looked so far at how we can use Trusted Advisor for cost optimization, how we can see kind of real-time usage in Cost Explorer within the console. But I want to go over our budgets, because budgets are a great way to be able to forecast your spend and to get information on what your spend is for single accounts or multiple accounts, and also get those reports sent to you. So I've got here kind of a view up right of our AWS budgets for my accounts. Obviously, I'm not very good at forecasting what my budget is, because as you can see here, for these numbers that I've put in, current versus budget is way busted. But this is a great example of being able to come in and see that information and understand what your spend looks like based on what you had expected your utilization to be on previous months' forecasts. So let's walk quickly through what it takes in order to create one of these budgets so you can kind of see for yourself. We have different types of budgets, and we're just going to stick with the plain cost budget, but you can see overall usage budget, reservation budgets, and saving plans budgets. And those are going to help you with obviously what they say for reservations across tracking information and for savings plans. But looking at just the cost budget itself, we're going to set our budget. Give it your name. So say we're going to look at this one. I already have one for EC2, but let's say I want to do one for my EKS budget. We have the option to do it monthly or quarterly or an annually report. I don't want to wait that long. I want to know every month, or at least have a report available to me that I can use for that. I'm going to leave it monthly. It's a recurring budget that I want. I know we're going to continue to use the Kubernetes service on AWS, so I'm going to leave that there. I'm going to set this up as a fixed budget, but I could switch to a monthly budget planning and say I know in August of 2020, we're planning on going to production and we're launching a large amount of EKS clusters in there as well. So our budget's going to change, so we're going to adjust what we're looking at. We could go through and kind of fill that. And you can see here, it will kind of come through based on those recommendations and say, if I want to autofill all those months based on a budget growth, I can also put in budget growth and say, my starting budget is $35,557, but I know that I'm going to see at least 15% growth. And now we've got it figured out for us. So you don't have to do the math yourself, which is nice, because if you're like me, I don't really want to spend all the time doing all that math. And this is a really handy tool to help you with that. But we're going to go back and just look at the fixed monthly budget and just say, I know that my usage is going to be $35.57. I don't want it to go over, say, $3,800, because that just seems like a lot. And I can scope it down here to per service, right? So that's where I want to know what my Elastic Compute for Kubernetes service is. So I'm going to filter it to just that service and come down here and say Elastic Container Service for Kubernetes and apply filters. And, now it's going to make an adjustment. I'm like, oh, great. I didn't filter it before to just that service. So now I need to readjust my budget, because if I'm spending $3,800 on EKS, then I'm wrong. So make sure that you come in, you filter the service you want first, because otherwise you're setting up your budget for way more money than you probably actually need. So I can look here and I can see, well, my EKS budget was actually $144 a month. So I'm going to set it to $145. And now we see we've got our filter, and it says, okay, here's what you were using it as. Here's what your spend is so far. You've got a budget amount of $145. You can go even further and granular and say, I only care about it within a specific account, because this is my master and this is my account that has resources. So I can filter down to a specific count, or say you're building this as a budget for one of your teams. So I've had customers in the past that I've worked with before, and they want to see a budget for a specific department, or they have different cost centers and they want that cost center to be responsible for understanding what their spend is. So they set up these additional filters and budgets so they can say, just for this account, I'm going to build this budget so that I can use this to keep track of our, obviously this team's doing containers work, whatever they're doing inside that. We're just going to set up a linked account for that and usage around there. So now we can go into configuring alerts, right? Because what good is a budget if no one actually comes in here to check it and actually see what is going on for that spend? So we want to be able to send out a notification and say, okay, my budget amount's $145. Say you want to, and I've had customers set up these budgets before where they're like, at 50%, I should get a budget notification halfway through the month, right? And if I don't, then My usage is less. If I get it earlier than halfway through the month, then I know my usage is more. So they build it out and they think, okay, I'm going to set up a couple of these alerts, because you can set up multiple, and say at 50% utilization. So basically, as you see here, the actual COD is greater than 50% at 7250. I want to get an email notification, based on that. And I'm going to send that to that email contact. I can add multiple. So if I wanted to go to that team plus the finance team, I can set that up. And then we also have the ability, we talked a little bit last time about the simple notification service and using it to get some automated alerts. Say you already have a topic set up for spend for each department because they have other pieces that are using it as well. You could notify yourself via that simple notification service subscription that you already have up, or that topic you already have up. And all you would need then is to get this Amazon resource name or the ARN and paste it into here. I don't have one right now that we're going to use for that, so I'm going to leave that out. Another really cool thing that's newer, if you haven't seen, is the AWS chatbot. So the AWS chatbot lets you interact with your AWS console through, say, Amazon Chime or through Slack to either get like CloudWatch alerts or to pull information from your Amazon accounts via those methods. Like if you had an Amazon Chime room set up, you could do at AWS and talk to your chatbot and it would return back information. So if you wanted to, you could use a topic that you had set up for chatbot, put that in here, and then you would get those live communications to your Slack room or to your Amazon Chime room as you needed. So I already have some budget set up. This is not obviously going to go to me, but we see here that we have budget details. So it gives us a breakdown of that budget and says, here's the EKS budget that I set up. It's going for monthly. It starts May 1st. Our budget amount is $145. So we want to set up an alert based on that at 50%, when we get halfway through the month, hopefully that's when it goes off, we should get a notification. If we wanted to do that again, like I said, we could set up multiple alerts and say at 90%, I want to get a notification. At 100%, I want to get a notification. And that way you'll be able to get those alerts and see what they look like for those budgets. So I have all these budgets set up already, and I want to just set up a budget report that sends me additional reporting for these. So I have all these nice budgets. I could do one per person and set up a budget report, or I can group them all together and say these all need to go to finance, but at least they're broken down by account. And that's where we can leverage our budget reports. So budget reports located right underneath budgets in the console conveniently. We can see here, I just named one called IT budget. We're going to go in and take a look at the IT budget and see that I've chosen all these different budgets that I already set up to be compiled into this report. And I said, this is my IT budget, and I'm going to choose configure of the frequency of this. So I can say I want to get it daily, weekly, monthly. And then I will get a budget sent to me daily based on those reports. So let's take a quick look and see what one of those reports actually looks like. Hopefully you guys can see this. But this is an AWS budget report that shows, it will tell you what account it's for and say, hey, dear AWS customer, this is your budget reporting information for these. And you could actually click to link into them. But nicely, it gives you this little single pane of glass in your email of what your forecasted versus budgeted percentage is, and some information, plus a nice convenient link to go right into the reports dashboard so you can actually see your budget reports. So that's a little bit on AWS budgets. Were there any questions at all, Padma, so far about budgets and kind of setting those up?
Yeah, there are a few questions here. So I see a question here from Shri. If I add credits, AWS credits to my account, and the bill becomes, and then I overshoot the credit limit, how can I track how much credit is used and how much is left? There are ways in budgets to set credit alerts that would cover just the credits or anything that goes beyond credits as well.
Okay.
I think that was part of what you covered as well. Anything more to add to that, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, for credits and stuff, Cost Explorer is going to be your great view to look at for all that information. It's going to give you the breakdown of all the different spending. You can filter basically on a lot of different categories. Cost Explorer could be like a half-day course, I believe, on its own of just kind of digging into all the different filters and things there. So, Well, great. So if we've covered budgets and stuff, I do want to kind of get through and look at some other great options that we have for our cost optimization with EC2, other than just seeing what you're spending, right? So you really want to understand how you can save on it. So want to kind of dive into our compute optimizer. I do have a couple slides here that I just want to kind of go over, really, so you understand what compute optimizer is, right? It's designed for EC2 instance optimization. We looked at the right sizing before in Cost Explorer, and this is basically our newer iteration of improving on that. So we had Trusted Advisor to do low utilization and high utilization checks. High utilization meaning that your instance is basically at 85% or higher regularly on the CPU usage, and maybe it needs to be upsized. And then low meaning that it maybe needs to be downsized. We went over Cost Explorer and kind of going through right sizing recommendations, downsizing within the same instance family. So if we noticed our checks before were for a T3 2x large, and it sized it down to a T3 large and then down to a micro and such, but it was all within the T family. So this is where AWS Compute Optimizer really comes in and helpful, because it makes EC2 instance type recommendations for your standalone instances and auto-scaling groups across instance families. So it allows you to not only go from, say, a T3 extra large to, say, like an R instance based on your usage, because one of the nice things that it adds into is if you're leveraging the CloudWatch agent on your EC2 instances, which is a definite improvement and must for using Compute Optimizer well, it's going to also take into account your memory metrics as well. So it's going to help you by looking at those memory metrics to get a better overall view of what instance type it should recommend it, right? So you can go to instances from the M to C to R to T and X families of those instances. And if you're not familiar with those, you can look. The Elastic Cloud Compute has a variety of different instances that are available for, say, memory optimized or compute optimized in some different areas. And so we kind of go through that, right, and make some good recommendations based on these things. So we see that we take into account, once you opt into the Compute Optimizer, it takes you into basically giving us access just to the CloudWatch metrics so that it can make those recommendations based on machine learning algorithms that run in the background that understand what your usage looks like compared to what other customers' usage looks like, and makes recommendations then onto those EC2 instances for you. So it analyzes your configuration, resource utilization, performance data, and looks at this a lot of different information to make these recommendations for you, and then gives you those lower costs and helps you get going into usage of this. So I do want to show really quickly, what this actually looks like in the portal itself. So this is a view of what Compute Optimizer looks like. The first time you come to the console, it's going to ask you to opt into using the service. And like I said, that's basically saying that you're letting the service look at your CloudWatch metrics to collect your memory and CPU usage, because normally we don't collect a lot of memory usage information or anything on those instances, just for your security and such. And we're just basically allowing this basically to collect those metrics so we can build really good recommendations for you on compute. So we can see the breakdown that we have goes into under-provisioned instance, optimized instances, and over-provisioned instances. So going into, again, what Trusted Advisor kind of called a low utilization to high utilization instance, it's going to help you make those recommendations. So previously we looked at some ones that were oversized, right, and needed to be downsized. So let's look at some that are over-provisioned really quickly. And that way we can see what the recommendations look like across families. So as we can see here, we have a T32 extra large, and it's saying that it's costing, on-demand price of 0.480 cents per hour. An R5 extra large, based on our learning of what your usage pattern is for this instance, is going to be cheaper at 0.436 cents per hour instead. So you're going to save money by switching instance families and getting that, over-provisioned instance down in size and into a different instance class based on your usage. So you can see it continues to make these different recommendations across platforms. Even down here, right, it's a C5, and it says, hey, based on your usage, you could go to a T3 large instead. The whole goal is to make sure that we're making good recommendations based upon what we've learned as usage patterns for customers. Again, just like the EC2 right sizing, you're going to have to do your due diligence as well to make sure that, switching from a C5 to a T3 doesn't affect your application, doing some testing. But if you could save some money per hour on cost, I'm sure you'd like to do that as well. Great. So any questions, Padma, so far about just Compute Optimizer in general?
Not Compute Optimizer in general, but just to, Flash Harry 82 has been adding some great comments here on the chat window. Thank you for that. So just to quickly, sort of look at the difference between the Cost Explorer and the Compute Optimizer that you were talking about. The Compute Optimizer takes into account additional metrics such as memory to provide information on switching across instance families and providing that recommendation. Whereas using the EC2 right sizing, we can switch within the same instance family but across different sizes. Did I capture that
Exactly.
correctly?
Yep, that is exactly correct. So that's why this is a little bit newer service, and it's definitely one to kind of take a look at if you've got the time to start researching your cost savings with EC2, because it's going to give you a cross instance family, so not just downsizing in the same one like the EC2 right sizing recommendations.
Got it. So I want to touch on one other topic before we take it back to all the questions here and try to answer some of these here. We talked about a lot of cost savings and optimization on EC2 in the cloud. You talked about the Trusted Advisor. We talked about Cost Explorer, Budget Reports, Compute Optimizer. Is there anything you can share with us on cutting costs for on-prem resources and that environment? Can you touch on that?
Yeah, sure. I can cover that. So we have a great service that's available, and let me just pull up some information actually on it for our Amazon WorkSpaces, right? So if you're not familiar with Amazon WorkSpaces, it's our service that allows you to have basically a desktop as a service in AWS. So let me pull up the right little slide here, and we'll kind of look at what that looks like. So if you have, an army of desktops or laptops at your office, in order to save like on-premise compute resource costs and such, you could leverage Amazon WorkSpaces. It allows you to kind of go off and get rid of some costly on-premise infrastructure. Say if you're hosting your own VDI solution or virtual desktop solution on-prem, and that hardware itself costs you money, plus administration of that hardware and such. We can help you get rid of those costly on-premise infrastructure. We've got complex app management, so has some built-in tools that will help you manage those workspaces. You don't have to worry about unsecured personal devices, right? So BYOD doesn't become such a big issue, having your people bring their own devices, because you're not actually storing or using those as your workspace. You're using the Amazon workspaces for that. Also helps to eliminate poor user experience, as say you have a laptop that is getting older, or a tablet or such that's less performant than it was when it was brand new. You're not really relying on that hardware itself in order to do this, so you don't have to constantly refresh hardware or manage that infrastructure really. So the nice benefit to Workspaces is you have access to your resources anywhere from any device using the Workspaces client or through the Workspaces web interface. You can scale quickly with the changing resource. So instead of having to order 50 laptops for 50 new hires, you can spin up 50 workspaces within that day, rather than waiting for those to come in, having to image those, make sure they're updated, maintaining your master image on-prem. To do that, you can kind of leverage that quickly and scale a lot faster with Amazon Workspaces, which may enable you to be able to innovate more fast or more quickly on things, leveraging a desktop as a service platform. We can improve overall security and control, because you're basically giving them access to a desktop, right? That's as a service to them. So you have control of that desktop to apply things. Say one of the requirements for using Amazon Workspaces is having a directory service to use with it, like Active Directory. If you're familiar with Active Directory, you can put a lot of different security controls on through group policy objects, so that you can use those to kind of help you administer like the Windows workspaces a lot quicker and easier for you with then your physical devices that you may have to get enrolled in, like an MDM and stuff like that for management of those devices, like when they leave your offices, and hardware encryption and such. Increased user productivity is another nice thing, because you basically just get them a desktop and they're up and running with all the software they have. Everything's kind of deployed for you in an image that you can build using Workspaces, and it's all pay as you go. So if you set up your Workspaces to auto stop, which is a feature that's built into Workspaces, those will stop on you when they're not in use after a time that you set, say like 2 hours. You want to make sure that people have the time to walk away and go to lunch, but they not have to come back and relaunch their instance or kind of wait for their instance to warm back up again. You can set some timeouts and stuff like that. But when they're stopped, then you're not paying for those resources, a lot like in Elastic Cloud Compute. So it's a really handy thing. So you get a really good user experience. It supports a lot of different types of hardware. So I mentioned before, having to buy costly laptops or high-powered desktops. You have a lot of different, we call bundles available for you in WorkSpaces to handle, a basic user experience, a high-end user experience, or someone who needs access to, say, like graphical processing units in order to do like GPU stuff. If they're doing like statistical analysis and say like R or something like that, and they want to be able to leverage ANOVA and use like a GPU against that, they can use that. Otherwise, with this, like you can just use basically a tablet or commodity hardware that's lower end that you don't have to worry about, that hardware being unable to run their simulations and such on it. They can access it from their tablets. So if they have an iPad or something like that they're taking around with them, they can quickly log into their desktop remotely from their phone. And it's all secure through the WorkSpaces connection client. You get your local printing, and it's a really nice client overall and gives you a really good benefit in order to be able to save on that cost and leverage WorkSpaces instead as a service. So thanks, Ben. That was a great question to kind of ask on how we could save money for on-premise kind of usage.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob. I want to take one more question here from the chat window here. Rob, can you sort of give us suggestions for some tools that we can use to manage costs for, I see a question from Nick Reinke here, for sub-organizational accounts. So, linked accounts or accounts that are not part of the paid account. Can you tell us one or two tools that we can use to manage that?
Yeah, so if you're in part of an organization, right, within Cost Explorer, you'll be able to see all of your linked accounts if you're logged into that master payer account. So definitely take advantage of that, because you'll be able to kind of go through and granularly see through each individual account. And then another kind of nice thing that is newer as well, that I guess I didn't get a chance to show about Trusted Advisor, is we actually recently launched the AWS Systems Manager Explorer. And that gives you the ability to see Trusted Advisor checks. So again, if you're an enterprise or business support customer, you have availability to all the checks in Trusted Advisor. You'd be able to kind of come into Explorer here, and you have to set up a data sync for it. So I have one called Org Data Sync. That's for my organization. If I choose that data sync, then it allows me to come down here and see across all my accounts those checks. It starts off with source categories, so I can look at cost optimization across accounts easily this way, or I can go into source account ID and just see the checks per account overall, what they kind of rank at. So that's one way to kind of look at it for cost optimization over different accounts. Again, what you were touching on before, Padman, with the usage of tags is really important. All the time we're improving on how you can tag things and making more and more services taggable so that you can leverage those in Cost Explorer to see those. If you don't have, say, like if you have an account that's kind of an orphan account that isn't in an organization, then you run into a little bit more of a challenge of like an overall arching view, other than leveraging things like those budgets in order to set budgets up in that account to feed into your main account kind of resources and such for reporting. Thank
you, Rob. And thank you for the great question, Nick. So it was a nice segue to show you a little bit about SSM. Thank you so much for that. So just to summarize today, we looked at Trusted Advisor's cost optimization checks. We looked at AWS Cost Explorer, budgets, and setting up alerts. Then we looked at the EC2 Cost Optimizer. Think of these as different services, giving you a different mix of tools so that you can optimize performance while also keeping your costs under control. As you run your business, you need to have complete near real-time visibility into your cost and usage information. And these tools provide you a single pane of glass to make those informed decisions to do exactly that. We hope you found this session very useful. If there are questions that were not answered today, I highly encourage you to post your questions on forums.aws.amazon.com, and we will respond to your questions there. We want to hear your feedback, so send us your questions and feedback to kc-live@amazon.com. You will see the email link posted on this chat window. And thank you so much for joining us for AWS Knowledge Center Live. Happy cloud computing.